All right, we're right at 7:30. I'll give it another minute just in case people just thought to think to go to the link at 7:30, but then I'll get going with my spiel in just a minute and then I'll pass it over to you, Mary Jo, if that's okay. All right, so I'll go ahead and give the BLCA spiel while we're waiting for the last people to kind of join in. So my name is Abby Cosberg. I'm the executive director of the Banfield Locke Center for the Arts, and we host this reading series every month. We have for the past about 22 years, I believe. And so Mary Jo Peel is our curator for this year, and each month she invites two readers from the community to come in and read a selection of their work. And we're very excited about this month. I'll go over a couple Zoom etiquette things first. So just in case, I know we're a year in, a lot of us know a lot about Zoom right now, but just in case you aren't quite comfortable with it, I'll give some suggestions. I will ask everyone who's not the speaker to be on mute. And if you're not on mute, I will go through and physically mute you. So don't be surprised if you get like "you are now muted" sign popped up. Um, I would recommend, it can get very overwhelming to have, with this many participants, to have all the little squares up and be watching everyone at a time. If you go into the top right corner, you can change your view into speaker view, which will show just the person who's talking at the same time. And Zoom, another thing we should add is that Zoom is a one channel audio. So if you try to say something while someone else is talking, it'll cancel out their audio. So again, that's why we ask you to be on mute while we're giving the speakers are speaking. At the end, we will have a Q&A, which will be facilitated by Mary Jo, and you can either put questions in the chat, which I would highly encourage, or you can raise your hand or unmute or ask. But again, please be respectful that Zoom can get kind of hard and laggy if multiple people are talking. And so you might have to wait a second and we'll have one person at a time, and the chat always works great if you're nervous about that. And then my last part of the spiel is that the BLCA is reopening on Tuesday, and we're very excited about that. Well, it's the first time we've had our doors open this year, and actually since about last October. And so we'll be open. We have two exhibitions. One is called So Free by Fresh Eye Arts, which is an extension of the Midwest Special Services. And it's a show about artists with disabilities and who are transitioning now into the for-profit art world and having bigger exhibitions. And then the other exhibition we have is called Belonging Together by Gabriella Sierra. And she's a student artist at the University of Minnesota who does portraits of BIPOC female artists and members of the community and tells their stories. And she has a wonderful podcast series that goes along with that as well. I would love to have people come out and see us. We're open Tuesday through Saturday from 10 to 4, but we also have all of our exhibitions and all of our programming online through virtual tours. And with that, if anyone has any questions or technical issues, please message me. You can put it directly in the chat. I'm happy to help problem solve. Other than that, I will pass it over to Mary Jo.
Thanks, Abby. I too am super excited about tonight's readers, and I'd like to just get us started. First off, we have Carolyn Holbrook, and she's a writer, educator, and longtime advocate for the healing power of the arts. Her essay collection, Tell Me Your Names and I Will Testify from the University of Minnesota Press, is a finalist for the 2021 Minnesota Book Award. She's also the co-author of Minnesota civil rights icon, Dr. Josie R. Johnson's memoir, Hope in the Struggle, also from the U of M Press. And her essays have been published widely, most recently in A Good Time for the Truth, and it was an amazing piece, Race in America and Blues Vision, African American Writing from Minnesota. And those are both from the Minnesota Historical Society Press. She's the recipient of 3 Minnesota State Art Board grants, as well as an MRAC Next Step grant. And in 2016, she received a 50 over 50 award from AARP, Paul and Midwest. And Carolyn was the first person of color to win the Minnesota Book Awards K. Sexton Award in 2010. And she's the founder and artistic executive director of More Than a Single Story, for which she won a Minnesota Women's Press Changemaker Award in 2015. She was also the founder and director of Sassy, The Right Place, and she teaches creative writing at the Loft Literary Center, other community venues, and at Hamline University, where she won the Exemplary Teacher Award in 2014. Welcome, Carolyn. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, and thanks for having me, Mary Jo. You mentioned that I was the founder and executive director of Sassy, The Right Place. Many people don't know that this reading series at Banfield Lock started as a Sassy reading when Leah Rivamonte was the executive director. So it's always kind of fun to come back here and read. My book is a memoir, but it's structured as a series of standalone essays. And this is largely because the essays were written over a long period of time, beginning in the 80s when my 5 children were teenagers. Some have been published previously in other publications, but and part of putting the book together was to consider which ones would work together. And it was also kind of fun to go back and look at some of the older ones and consider how I view that situation today, as opposed to when I was writing it. So what I'm going to read for you tonight is an excerpt, well, several excerpts, I guess, from a longer essay in the book, which was also published last summer as a chapbook called Earth Angels. And that's one of the essays that was previously published that's currently in my book. So I will just begin. Well, I'll tell you to set it up a little bit. It's about an incident that happened in the year 2000. My younger brother was very ill, and in fact, he was dying. And I was just kind of beside myself. And, I was distracted when I was driving one night and I hit a pedestrian. So this is about that. And, there are a lot of layers to this piece, but I will focus on the pedestrian. Okay. As I sit in my car waiting for the light to change, I cringe when I see a bus nearing the intersection of 28th and Lindale. Whenever I close my eyes, I find myself back inside the moment when the dark-clad woman crashed onto the hood of my car, slid into the street, hit the pavement, bounced, and then rolled into the gutter. It was 2 weeks ago, but still I can't stop my hands or my body from shaking whenever I draw close to that intersection. When the accident happened, I felt like I was outside of my body, watching myself jump watching myself jump out of my car, leaving the door open and the engine running. It was almost as if I were someone else watching me run over to where the woman was lying, someone else watching me tear my coat off, plop down onto the curb, and gently lay the woman's head in my lap and wrap my coat around her to keep her warm while we waited for the ambulance to arrive. She was so young, she could have been one of my daughters. I wanted to keep her safe, like I hoped someone would take care of my daughter if any such circumstances arose. People soon appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, some to see what had happened, others to help. A man in a dark green hoodie and tan cargo shorts called 911. I wonder why I remember the details of what he had on, but nothing about the woman who sat beside me and draped a blanket around my shoulders, along with a comforting arm, or the man who gave me a flower, or the person who turned off my car and handed me my keys. A young police officer with a blonde crew cut took the police report. With a kindness in his voice that surprised me, he said he wasn't going to ticket me. This is a dark corner, and she was dressed in dark clothing, he said. I probably wouldn't have seen her either. An ambulance snaked through the crowd, its siren making those intermittent chirps that warn people to make room so it can get through. While the EMTs strapped the woman in to a backboard to place her inside the ambulance, I asked if I could accompany her to the hospital. One of them replied that they could only tell relatives which hospital they were taking her to. And then, as quickly as they arrived, they took off, siren blaring, leaving me standing in the street watching the crowd disperse into the night. For a moment, I wondered if I had been dreaming, but soon a middle-aged couple came over and helped me back into my coat. I had forgotten how chilly it was. It was March, and we were in that in-between stage where it might snow one day and you can wear a light jacket the next. I accepted their offer to take me home. The man helped me into my car and asked for directions, and the woman followed in their car. Once home, I jabbed the elevator button several times as though punching it might make it come faster. When I finally reached my apartment, I rushed to the phone before taking my coat off or putting my purse down and called Hennepin County Medical Center, Abbott Northwestern, North Memorial, and Methodist hospitals. None would give me any information. One receptionist said, "Lady, we get a lot of accidents here every night. Unless you can give me the victim's name, there's nothing I can tell you." I wanted to go to each hospital and demand that they tell me if she was there, but I knew it would be futile. I didn't know her name, and I doubted that I could describe her. So I sat on my couch in a daze instead. After a while, I fell into a brief, restless sleep and woke up screaming, "Something's gone terribly wrong." I couldn't stop thinking about the accident over the next few days, couldn't stop talking about it either. I needed to know if the woman was all right. Friends and colleagues advised me to leave it alone. She might sue you, they warned, but I couldn't leave it alone. My heart wouldn't be quiet, neither would the nightmares or the daytime images of her limp body sliding off the hood of my car. Early in the morning, 3 days later, the day, excuse me, the day the officer said I could pick up a copy of the police report, I headed over to the precinct, which was at that time located on 24th and Nicollet. I hesitated before going in, fighting flashbacks of a night some years before when the cops burst into my apartment looking for my son. The digital clock on my nightstand showed 3:16 a.m. when I heard the hard, insistent knock. I jumped out of bed and ran to the door, sure that something horrible had happened. A look through the peephole revealed three beefy cops, each with a gun in the holster resting against his hip. A fourth man stood in front of them. I assumed he was a detective. He was wearing a suit that reminded me of the cheap gray suits I see on detectives in movies and Law and Order episodes. I opened my door slightly, leaving the chain secure. My heart was pumping so hard that I could hear it. The detective, a short, slender man with graying brown hair, flashed his badge and asked if my son was home. "No," I replied. But before I could tell him that Stevie had called a couple hours before and told me that he was in jail having been mistaken for a guy who had committed a murder, the detective motioned to the others. They pushed past me and rushed into my apartment, snapping the chain on the lock, excuse me. Wait, I screamed. Stevie's not here. He's in jail. But by then, they were storming through the apartment, knocking my furniture over, scattering toys and tearing covers off beds, yelling, "Where is he? Where the hell is he?" My other 4 children, who were much younger than 18-year-old Stevie, were disoriented from having been wakened so harshly. They ran through the apartment like scared little rabbits, screaming their hearts out while they watched this gang of burly white men in blue uniforms and guns rage through our home. Trying to stay calm, I picked up my youngest and placed her on my hip and led the others who were clinging to me by then into my home office, my bare feet sloshing through a wet spot on the carpet where one of the girls had soiled her nightgown. I called the detective into the room, then picked up the phone, turned on the speaker option, and dialed the Minneapolis men's jail. I asked the man who answered if they were holding my son. The detective, clearly surprised by the response he heard on the other end of the phone, stopped his men. They left, leaving me to calm my children and to clean up the mess they had created. I never received an apology, neither did Stevie. Then I go, after I picked up the police report, relieved that the police report showed that the woman was uninjured, just bruised and shaken. I rushed home, grateful that her name, address, and phone number were on the document. I picked up the phone and punched in her number, rubbing my sweaty palms on my jeans while her phone rang. Her answering machine confirmed that I had dialed the right number, the number for Cassandra, the name on the police report. My lips parted, but the words I wanted to say stayed glued inside of my mouth. I quickly placed the receiver back in its cradle and tried again an hour later. This time she answered on the second ring. Fearing that she might think it was a prank and hang up if I didn't say something soon, I let my words tumble out, telling her who I was and why I was calling. I listened to her inhale and exhale on the other line, sure that she was going to slam the phone down and probably change her number. But after a moment, she said, "I've been wondering how you're doing too." That was the last thing I expected to hear. Then I just go into my brother being ill and the things that, occurred while my mother and I were waiting in the hospital. I'll skip over all of that and go back into the accident. With all this going on in my mind, I know I was distracted the night of the accident. I felt so guilty that it was hard to believe this woman whom I might have killed said she was wondering how I was doing since the accident. And yet here she was, continuing the pattern of kindness that so many people had shown me that night. Let's see. I wanted to tell her the truth, that I wasn't doing very well, that I had lost 2 of my siblings over the last 8 years and was about to lose the third one. But instead of telling her what I was going through, I invited her to lunch. She had accepted, and now I stood at my door, fingers glued to the doorknob. The decision to take her to lunch had been easy because our phone conversation was so warm. "I've been thinking of you too," she had said. I made reservations at the Rainbow Chinese restaurant, a safe place where the staff knew me. Nevertheless, I took my time getting dressed, settling on colors that would calm me, a black turtleneck and a purple, brown, and black scarf, which I hoped would draw attention away from the uncertainty I was surely wearing on my face. I laced my boots and slung my bag over my shoulder, but when I got to the door, I couldn't move. What if my friends were right? What if the kindness I'd heard in the young woman's voice on the phone was a ruse to hide the truth, that she was really about to do me in? What would I do if her lawyer was with her? What if she was wearing a wire? Was I about to walk into something I wouldn't be able to get out of? Deciding that I had been watching too many Law and Order episodes, I turned the doorknob and walked down the hall, hoping there would be a note on the elevator announcing that it was out of order. Once outside, I drove slowly through the cool, misty rain, stretching the 20-minute drive to a half hour. The soft rain fell rhythmically on my windshield like a heartbeat, seeming to echo my constant question. With my siblings all gone, why am I still here? Skipping over. All the way to the restaurant, I wondered if I would recognize Cassandra. Several weeks had passed since the accident, and all I had was the memory of her rolling off the hood of my car and into the gutter, and the memory of sitting on the curb holding her head in my lap. The host greeted me and escorted me to the table where Cassandra was waiting. I recognized her right away. The short, dark curls that I had stroked while waiting for the ambulance to arrive were unmistakable, but she seemed thinner than she had appeared the night of the accident. We made feeble attempts at small talk while perusing the menu. Thankfully, the weather is always a passable topic in Minnesota, so we commented on the rain. When the server brought water and took our orders, we sat in uncomfortable silence, searching for words, both taking long glances at the restaurant's oversized goldfish tank and watching the lunch crowd slowly invade the popular restaurant. I wanted to tell her how sorry I was for the harm I had caused her, but was unable to find the words I had so carefully planned to say. Instead, she was the one who broke the silence. She cleared her throat, excuse me, causing me to turn my attention from the goldfish tank and my heartbeat to rise in anticipation of what I feared she was about to say. Then she looked me in the eye and she said, "You are an angel." Her voice was as clear as her sharp brown eyes. There was no mistaking what she had said, but I couldn't believe that I was hearing her correctly. I had been worried sick about her, and now here I was sitting across from her in this restaurant, harboring a hint of a fear that she might reach into her purse and pull out a summons, or that two plainclothes detectives might walk over to us, one placing me in handcuffs while the other read my Miranda rights. But instead, she had called me an angel. The imaginary detective slid out of the picture, but not before I could ask what she was thinking. Because I could have killed you that night. She explained that she was a Mormon and had traveled here from her home state to be with a man she had fallen in love with, a guy who worked in theater. "I've always loved theater," she said. A pained yet wistful look hovered over her face when she explained that her family was conservative and straight-laced and didn't approve of her aspirations toward the arts, fearing that it might disrupt her faith. I don't know anything about the Mormon religion, but I have certainly known Christians who have left family members feeling condemned and isolated for similar reasons. Also, I admit that as a parent, I have experienced moments when I feared what might happen to my children if they strayed away from the belief system that I tried to instill in them. I do not have a specific faith tradition, but I do believe that there is a source higher than us who looks out for everyone, no matter their faith or their life orientations. So even though my beliefs are very different from those of her parents, I could understand their pain as well as hers. "Things didn't work out with the guy," she said. "I don't know if he changed or if he simply wasn't what I thought he was." I watched tears begin to creep down her pale cheeks. "He became mean, almost cruel in the things he said to me. And after a while, I lost confidence and began to feel confused." She said that in spite of him, she enjoyed her time in Minneapolis. "I have met so many kind and wonderful people." She dried her tears with her napkin and said, "This is the first time I've met people who were different from the people in my community back home. I've never seen people of different races, let alone lived next door to them or worked with them." Then, after a brief pause, she said, "But I miss my family, and I've never stopped questioning my relationship with God." She then looked me in the eye and said once again, "You are an angel." She explained that until the accident, she didn't know she could go back home. She feared that that she would be shamed and wouldn't be allowed back into her family or her church. The accident helped me realize that I can go home. Then she thanked me for having been willing to be the messenger that gave her that clarity. I hugged her and walked slowly out of the restaurant, still feeling a little dazed, but glad that I had followed my heart and not allowed myself to be talked out of contacting her. I stood for a moment on the sidewalk in the misty rain and then got back into my car. All the way home, as the rain again echoed the beats of my heart, I thought about angels, some as messengers, others who come in and out of our life for brief periods of time, like my siblings and my beloved stepfather. The army of angels that I believe are always there guiding us, such as those who led me out of my troubled marriage and let me know that I could return home. And now the angels who brought Cassandra and me together to give her the same message. Maybe that's why I'm still here. Maybe my siblings completed what they came here for. Maybe I still have work to do. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Carolyn. Thank you so much. Hi, Kevin, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. That was incredible,
Yeah.
Carolyn.
Thanks,
Wow,
Kevin.
it's incredible.
Thank you. And
Oh,
by the way, I'm very excited to be reading with you, Kevin Kling. I've never read with you before.
no, I know. I was thinking that too. I was going back. No, it's really great to see you.
Yeah.
Oh, that was incredible.
I
Oh,
feel like a matchmaker. I'm going to take a little credit here because I've been so
Yeah.
excited about this night. So,
mhm.
Mhm.
Kevin, I'm going to bring you up if you're ready, sir.
Sure.
All right.
So this is going to be kind of told and read a little bit, but mostly told because I'm a storyteller and I usually tell things for many years before writing them down. So this is some old and new stuff.
Hey, Kevin,
Yeah.
do you mind if I say a few words about you?
No, did I jump in too fast?
Yeah, and I'm really furious about it. So
Sorry about that.
sit down, Junior.
I thought you were, I thought you green lighted me.
No, I would just really like, I'm sure most people know who you are, but I would like to say a little bit about you if you don't mind.
Sorry, Mary Jo. Yeah.
No, it's okay. Our wonderful Kevin Kling is a storyteller and playwright and a frequent commentator for National Public Radio's All Things Considered and TPT's Almanac. And Kevin was named Minneapolis Story Laureate by Mayor R.T. Ryback in 2014, Minneapolis Mayor. And he's performed his plays in Sweden, Australia, Scotland, and the Czech Republic. And his plays have been produced at the Goodman Theater, Jungle Theater, Denver Center Theater, Seattle Reps, Cincinnati Playhouse, Guthrie, and regional theaters throughout the country. And in addition to being a McDowell Fellow, Kevin has been awarded fellowships from the NEA, McKnight Foundation, Minnesota State Arts Board, Bush Foundation, and Jerome Foundation. And Kevin's books include The Dog Says How, which I just carry in my heart, Holiday Inn, Big Little Brother, Big Little Mother, On Stage with Kevin Kling. And his book, Come and Get It, was chosen as the 2012 Minnesota Center for Book Arts Winter Book. Kevin has also produced 6 storytelling CDs. Take it away, Kevin.
Thank you. Thanks, Mary Jo. That was nice. That was worth it. So yeah, I'm gonna tell some stories, and the first one starts out. I went to Ireland a few years ago with my mom because she called me and she said, "I heard when you're 80 years old, it's hard to travel. I'm 79. We're going to Ireland." So I said, "All right." And I've been telling people ever since. And when this COVID's done, when we can travel, please, everybody, don't put it off. If you get a chance, go to Ireland with my mom. It's incredible. And so we're in Ireland and I'm trying to climb up this ladder. And if in case you don't know, my arms are different than yours. They're different than most people. This arm, I have 4 fingers on this side, no thumb. So when I work with kids, I say, if you want a high 5, you're out of luck, but we can high 4 all day. And my other arm, I tell people about that too because adults are out there. I wonder if he knows about his arms. Yeah, I do. And this one I haven't moved since 2001 when I was in a motorcycle accident. So I was in Ireland with mom and I was having a hard time climbing up this ladder. And and the captain, who hadn't said anything all week, all of a sudden turns to me and says, "Every man goes out of his mind in his own way." I'm thinking, yeah. And everybody comes into their mind in their own way too, buddy. So Mary Oliver said, it's not the weight, it's how we carry it. Johnny Cash said, talent is God given, but our style comes from our limitations. My friend Jeff Farnham used to say, what doesn't kill me makes me grumpier. When I was a kid, uh, there were two kinds of fairy tales I hated and fairy tales I hadn't heard yet, because it always turned out bad for the guy with a disability. You look at Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. She trades in all seven perfectly good little ones for one big one. So that's Ugly Duckling. I mean, I loved how that book started with this duck, this huge uber duck that stepped on all the other ducks. Then they find out he's a swan. What does that do for a kid with a disability? Hope that a ship of aliens lands and goes, no, you're really one of us. And meanwhile, I'm stuck living with the ducks. But my grandma would say, no, Kevin, no, stories can go any way you want them to go. That's why they were called folk tales, because they changed with the people. They changed with the time. Folk tales were meant to take us through thresholds. And she told me a story that was a folk tale for me. And it was about the time when pots and pans could talk, which indeed they still do. And a man used to go to the river and fill 2 pots with water and bring them home. Well, one day a small crack was discovered in one of the pots. And as time on, that crack widened until by the time the man got home, all the water had leaked out of that pot. So the pot turned to the man and said, please, every day you take me to the river, every day that water leaks out, would you please replace me with another pot? And the man turned to the pot and said, look down the trail. And the pot looked down the trail, and on the side of the trail with the pot that didn't have a crack, it was craggy and rocky and barren. But on the side of the path with the pot with the crack, wildflowers grew. And the man said, every day you water those flowers. Every day you make my difficult journey beautiful. I think I'll keep you. And with that, my grandmother would wrap her large Teutonic arms around me and say, I think I'll keep you. So those were the stories I got when I was a kid. And so I always thought of my left arm as special. I always thought it, and I still consider it the reason why I'm a writer, because people use different words with me than they used with other kids. They would call my arm withered or crippled or say, you poor thing, or what happened. But by the words they chose, I could tell whether they blamed me, my parents, God, or themselves for my condition. And with that information, I could get what I needed out of them. It wasn't purposeful. It's the way a kid works. So rhetoric became really important to me as a kid. Not what people said, but how they said it and why they said it. And I'm 100% sure that's why I became a writer and a storyteller. The Greeks called stories, they said they worked like a loom, and that vertically ran the metaphor, horizontally ran the sequence, and where they came together, they wove their invisible threads for their cloaks of immortality. One of my favorite words is the word belong. And I love that word because it's 2 words, being and longing. It's actually a paradox inside of one word. You be somewhere and you long to be elsewhere. It's how we need a nest and we need vastness. We need risk and we need challenge. We are our most happy when we are in this state of paradox. I think of how I grew up. I think of my parents, my mom. I wanted to tell this story today because Mother's Day is coming up. And I think of my mom in this story, but I'm going to start it back a little bit. My brother and I were always going to the emergency room for something done in the name of science. And I remember one time it was my turn to get stitches. So we're rushing to North Memorial Hospital, and we get there and we pull over and we're going into the emergency room. And we heard this honking horn, and we turn and there's a van in the parking lot. And the side doors open and a woman is having a baby right there in the parking lot. And and so we're looking at this woman having this baby, but what had drawn our attention to the van was these two boys. Oh, there's a doctor and a nurse in there attending her. She's going to be fine. But these boys in the front seat, one was honking the horn as fast as he could, and the other was dumping the contents of the glove compartment out the passenger side window. And in between pushes, the mom was yelling, "Riley, knock it off!" And I look over at my mom, and her mouth is hanging open. And I'm thinking, see, Mom, you got normal sons. But there's a day coming up, Mother's Day, but it's also got another name, the fishing season opener. And it's like, oh man, what do you do on that day? It's the kind of decision that feeds the essential demons of Lutheran guilt, because you got a mom and you got a fish. And so if you're like me, you're sitting in the boat, you're hoping you mailed the card in time. You're thinking you're going to make them fish pay for what they're doing to your mom. And as the waves are lapping in, I can hear my mom's reprimands rolling in with them like, what if everybody did that? They're rolling in. What are you boys doing in there? You better not be doing what I think you're doing in there. And then when she found out what we were doing, that's when those reprimands came back like, what if everyone did that? And I think, yeah, what if everyone did roll up my brother in a piece of carpet till he looked like a giant insane Pez dispenser? That would be great. Or the other one was, there's a time and a place for everything. I think, oh, so it's not that I blew up my sister's Barbie doll with a firecracker. It's more that I did it in the dining room at noon. But the most amazing thing about my mom was her purse. Her purse held the answer to everything. It was like a mystery wrapped in a conundrum wrapped in naga hide. And I remember my mom's purse, you couldn't throw that purse off. You get a cut on the face, a little spit on the hanky. But I remember one time when my mom's purse was put to the test. Okay, we were riding from Minnesota to Missouri to spend Christmas with my grandparents, which we did every year. And my sister called from college and said she couldn't get home for that amount of time. And my dad said, it'd be better if he just stayed in town and worked that weekend. But my mom said, no, she was going to spend Christmas with her parents. So my brother and I got in the car with my mom and we started driving through Iowa, where we were immediately pulled over by a cop for doing 95. And I think that cop had a mom too, because after the look my mom shot him, he got back in his car, drove off, case closed. We got down to Des Moines, and we're going through Des Moines at about 30 miles an hour when all of a sudden we hear this clunking, tearing racket. And we pull over and we go into a garage and they're looking at the car, and we go into the rest stop and sitting on a Naugahyde booth. And all of a sudden this mechanic comes in and he says, your transmission is shot. It's going to be 2 or 3 days before we get another one up from Kansas City. So we were going to miss Christmas with my grandparents. And my mom leans over on her hands. And me, being in junior high, did what I could to make matters worse. I said, if Dad was here, but he isn't there. And I look over at my brother and I can tell by his look, my brother knows the same thing I do. My family's falling apart. And there we are in this rest stop. And we both know it. And I know, oh no, my brother's going to cry. When my brother cries, I cry. But right before the tears started to flow, my mom reached in her purse and she pulled out a drinking straw wrapped in paper. She tore one end off of the straw and slid it down the straw until it formed a tiny paper concertina at the bottom. Then she pulled the straw out of the paper, dipped it in her water and said, watch this, boys, the magic snake. She put a drop of water on that paper and it began to move and unwind, like a snake. And then it stopped. I'd have to say it's the lamest trick I've ever seen. We're sitting there looking at this wet piece of paper and my mom leans forward on her hands again and now she's shaking. And so I reach out. This is the first time I reached my hand around my mom. This is the first time I initiated the hug with my mom. And she felt that and stopped. And she looked up and turned and looked at me and smiled. And then she started to laugh. My brother saw my mom laugh and knew that the tragedy hit bottom and was rapidly heading for the surface. So my brother started to laugh. And when my brother laughs, I laugh. And the three of us sat there and laughed. I grabbed 2 white non-dairy creamers, shoved them in my eyes, and started singing, "The sun will come out tomorrow." And then my brother tried to see how long he could keep a milk bubble on the end of his tongue. And we kept the talent contest going till the table was strewn with garbage. And the waitress said, what if everyone did that? But my mom, like a candle to the dark. So this year, the boat will have my body, but my heart will be with my mom. So happy Mother's Day, Mom. I want to get back disability really quick. I wanted to tell one story about this for sure. Uh, because there's a big difference between being born with a disability and achieving one later in life. I mean, one you grow from and the other you have to grow toward. Because when something happens to you in life, a loss of any kind of a trauma, you're still the old person you were, and you have to grow into that new person. And I was listening to Carolyn and I was thinking about my own motorcycle accident when I was hit by a car on my motorcycle, and how I had that moment people talk about where they say they see a light. I didn't see a light, but I was headed for an amazing sense of peace, and I was given the choice to follow the peace or to return to this plane of existence where it was clear even then there would be consequences. And I returned, and that's always troubled me. Why did I return? What? And I always look for the answer. I know there was a reason I came back, but what might that answer possibly be? But every day I learn something. Every day I learn something new. And this one I want to talk about Interact Theater, because I joined this theater company, Interact Theater. And the first day that we were there, they said, if you could take a pill to take away your disability, would you take that pill? And out of everyone in the room, I was the only one that said, yeah, I would take that pill. And I couldn't believe it. Of all the people in there, I couldn't believe that they wouldn't have the body they used to have, or the body they'd rather have, if they could take away their disability. It just baffled me. But every day then I started to learn things. Like there's this group of 4 singers with Down syndrome, and they call themselves the Downbeats, and they are absolutely hilarious. They're this amazing group of singers. One of the songs they sing was because their lead singer for a long time, Eric Wheeler, who we've lost now, Eric went to get his driver's license and they wouldn't give him his driver's license. And he said, why? And the woman behind the counter knew a little bit about Down syndrome. And so she told him, because you have too many chromosomes. So Eric wrote a song called Too Many Chromosomes to Drive a Car. And it was incredible. So one of their lead singers is Laura Mullen. And I remember we opened a show at Mixed Blood Theater one night, and it was one of those nights everything went wrong. I mean, it was one of those, props were breaking, people were forgetting lines, a fire broke out backstage. We got it out pretty fast. Oh, am I still on, Mary Jo? Okay, we got it out pretty fast, but everything just went, people were running out in the night, the sprinkler system came on, their ambulance showing up, fire trucks, and Laura turns to me and says, I can't work like this. There's a woman named Ingrid who has aphasia, which makes it very difficult for thoughts to become words. And one day, Ingrid turned to me and she said, before my aphasia, I used to feel I think, therefore I am. But now I know I come from a deeper place. Now I know I am, therefore I think. And when Ingrid said that, I thought of Rumi's beautiful love poem, before right doing, before wrongdoing, there is a field and I will meet you there. And it's why Shakespeare put the lover, the lunatic, and the poet in imagination, all one, because they go behind the mirror. They go behind what we see as reality. Like Dante. Dante went beyond the mirror. Dante, when he went to the underworld, he called it dis, D-I-S, which is Latin for the underworld. A place of shadow and reflection, the place we round off the rough edges of torment and desire. When Dante went to the underworld, he knew you can't cure a trauma, whether it's a broken limb, a heart, a promise. The heart especially is an instrument once broken, never plays the same. But although it can't be cured, it can be healed. And Dante knew this. He knew dis was a necessary step to paradise. And it's also the prefix for words like disability, which doesn't mean inability. It means able through another way, able through the world of shadow and reflection, a foot in 2 worlds, dis. So I'm with this theater company and I'm down in Australia, and we're performing a play that I wrote called Northern Lights, Southern Cross, about these 2 companies of people with disabilities, one from Minnesota, one from Australia, getting together. And we finished the show, and there were 5,000 people on the side of a hill. And when we were done, 2 opera stars named Teddy Rhodes and Simon O'Neill took the stage. And they were amazing. That's why the audience, these were heroes to this audience. And the idea was, when they were finished singing their solos and arias, that we were going to join them for the final number. But in intermission, the Sydney Symphony said they didn't have the music long enough. And if it was all right, could we just finish on one of their solos? And Teddy Rhodes said, yeah, I will take the last solo. So Teddy Rhodes finished the evening, and I mean, it was amazing. The audience jumped to their feet, 5,000 people, standing ovation. And as they're clapping, he reaches behind his back and pulls out a sheet of music. And he says, you know, we were supposed to end on another number, but the symphony didn't have the music long enough, and I understand that. But I've been looking at this music, and I think I can play it. And on the way in the park, I passed the stage outside with a piano. And if we can get to that upright piano, I think I can play this. 5,000 people didn't bat an eye. They grabbed their picnic baskets, their blankets, and we went to that small piano, and he played. And with our choir, they sang with the voices of angels and took us right before wrong to that place where I am, therefore I think. And that was the first time, the first of many times. There is no way I would have taken a pill to take away my disability. So I want to finish with a quick poem. This poem is called Tickled Pink, because my mom used to say, when you're in perfect health, your insides are in the pink, your innards are pink. So it goes, sometimes in our pink innocence, we find ourselves composting, you know, we're waiting to grow, or we rush headlong like so many of our ancestors. But it doesn't matter whether you're rushing or lying fallow. One day you'll round a corner, you'll blink, and something is missing. A heart, a limb, a promise, a person. And innocence is gone. And now, as though channeled through a spectrum, your path is refracted. And some people don't recognize you. Some people want the old you. And some people cry that you have left it all. But we pay for our laughter. We pay to weep. Knowledge is not cheap. To survive, we must return to our senses, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and let spirit guide us. Spirit is found in breath. With every breath we inhale, we exhale. We inspire, we expire. Every breath holds a possibility of a laugh, a cry, a story, a song. Every conversation is an exchange of spirit, the words flowing bitter or sweet over the tongue. Every scar is a monument to a battle survived. And when you're born into loss, you grow from it. When you experience loss later in life, you grow toward it. A slow move to an embrace that holds tight the beauty wrapped in the grotesque, an embrace that becomes a dance, a new dance, a dance of pink. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you. Thank you both so much. Pardon me. If you've got questions, please, let's talk. As Abby mentioned, you can send them through the chat, or I'm going to keep an eye on the screen here to see if anyone's raising their hand or needs to speak up. What questions have you got for our readers? Hello? Sorry, sometimes it's hard to see. I'm not ignoring y'all. Carolyn, I have a question for you. The structure of your book, you mentioned it's all these connected essays, and I'm curious to know how you sorted that material or how one essay led to another. Like, can you tell us more about that structure?
Well, first of all, big kudos to my editor, Eric Anderson. He helped me to put it together, you know, so that it made sense. We thought about doing it chronologically. That didn't seem to work. We thought about doing it thematically, and that didn't work. And as we continued to play around with the structure, we just came up with something that was closer to a thematic structure than a chronological one, but not quite either. And that's, yeah, so it ended up with you know, the last one is the most recent one, but the first one is not the oldest one.
Wow, right. Okay. Okay. One thing that I'd be curious to, and don't let me take over everyone, please send your questions along or raise your hand. Both of you had a theme about, Carolyn, you talked about having lost your siblings and why you were still on this earth. Kevin, you talked about that too. I was just noticing that parallel between both of you, and I'd be curious to know more about that from either of you, if you care to comment on that.
Well, I wasn't going to tell that story, but I was so moved by Carolyn's story, and it was just, and I wanted to tell it because I am so blown away by her clarity. But and so I'd love to hear more about how she had this window in the violence that she looked through. It's so beautiful and so yeah. I'd love to know how you tapped into that, or how do you do that?
You're asking me?
Yeah, because it's
Mhm,
your clarity and your specificity.
mhm. Thank you for that.
It's so beautiful.
One thing is that I'm a very slow writer. Um, and it takes me forever to complete an essay, especially one that's as layered as this one is. And it just, you know, I have to sometimes, you know, when I'm writing something that's as heart-wrenching as that was for me, I have to take it in small doses, which is why it takes so long. And also, you know, I want to make sure that by the time I'm done with it, that I'm clear on what I'm trying to say, and hopefully that it will be clear to the writer, or excuse me, to the reader as well. And I hope that made sense.
That was great, actually.
Mhm.
I'm putting that one in the pocket. That was a
Yeah,
really good.
I'm Carolyn. I have to say, I'm really glad to hear you say that you're a slow writer, because I am too,
Mhm.
and so I feel validated on some level, and honoring that process and taking time with
Mhm.
that process. And Kevin, I'm curious to know from you. You talk about your the arm you were born with, and then leaning into the one you acquired, and how your storytelling evolved, and how storytelling helps us heal or move on.
It really helped me a lot. I didn't ever think I had a disability until my second one. Because the first one is just who I was. I never even
Right.
thought of it as anything different than who I
Mhm.
was. And then when life changed, storytelling really helped, because when you can tell a story about something, it doesn't control you as much anymore. And they found that trauma, every time you tell a story, you change it a little bit, whether you know it or not. And so that it's slowly becoming something you can handle. And so people that are suffer trauma, post-traumatic stress, are still living in the first day it happened. And they
Mhm.
never leave the day it happened. And so part of storytelling, and part of the necessity of storytelling, and I think why we need it so much today in a country that's living in trauma, is that it helps us take our stories and bring them to a point where we can live comfortably in a mystery, because we're not going to solve it. It's not about following a light, it's finding solace in a mystery.
Mhm.
And the more we can tell it, the more solace we find in that mystery.
Yeah, and I would agree with that totally. In fact, I started writing these essays, like I said, when my kids were teenagers, uh, because you know, I had been divorced, and here I am suddenly alone trying to raise 5 kids by myself. And so I just started writing, you know, little things that they said and did that were funny, because, you know, trying to raise those kids by myself was not a walk in the park. And I needed to do something to keep myself sane. Um, And then, I showed them to someone, and they showed them to my neighborhood, the editor of my neighborhood newspaper, and they became a column. So I started writing this column, Diary of a Single Mom. I changed my name, called Diary of a Single Mom by Beatrice Mullins. And and I just kept going with them. And I believe in the healing power of the arts because of its effect, the effect that telling these stories has had on me. And now, when I read them to other people, and just as Kevin was talking about, his experiences, they are very healing for other people. Jean Calvin and I have been friends for a long time. You may or may not know that, but yeah, when you guys brought Southern Cross here to Minneapolis, I was just absolutely floored. It was amazing. It was amazing. And I'll always remember too many chromosomes to drive a car.
You nailed it. You even know the tune.
Of course I do. I was there.
Oh God, I love it. Yeah. Oh,
Carolyn, we have a question for you from Susan Reese, and she, getting back to your format, she's asking, she's curious about the format. Why did you choose to write a book of essays instead of a memoir with chapters? If you want to touch on that some more.
Struggled with that for a long time because all I knew for the longest time was memoir needed to be, from cover to cover, a trajectory from, one arc, the arc from one beginning to the end. And my essays just weren't turning out like that. And I didn't know, what the heck how to put it together. And then a friend of mine and I we decided to go to the Loft Pitch Conference a few years ago to try to pitch our work to agents. And I said to her, I don't know how to describe what I'm trying to do. And she said, it's a memoir in connected essays. And I said, oh, that's exactly what it is. So that's how that happened. It wasn't, I did try to make it a memoir from beginning to end, and it just didn't work. So I'm glad we have more than one way to skin a cat.
Yeah, right. I'm always really interested in how the story tells you what it needs to be.
And you should listen. Absolutely. Yeah. If you listen, it tells you.
Right.
Yep.
Carolyn, I have another question. I'm hoping some more people weigh in here, but I'm really curious where you got Beatrice Mullins, where that came from.
Same place creativity comes from. I have no idea.
So great.
It just popped into my head and I went with this. Yeah, I think I like that. Nobody will have any idea who Beatrice Mullins is.
Yeah, it's so great.
And I decided over time to claim my own stories. I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
Right on. And that's what, when I was listening to both you and Kevin answer, and when Kevin was talking about people telling their stories with post-traumatic stress disorder, I had this image of people being able to reclaim their experience and instead of having the experience continue to act on them. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I really had that visual when Kevin was describing that, and that's really powerful.
Yeah, ditto. It is, Kevin. Totally.
That's yeah, thanks.
Anyone else? I'm sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
No, and it lives in our bodies. I think what you just said, Mary Jo, is just perfect, right? It's in our bodies. It's in every fiber of us.
Yes.
Hold it in our DNA where somehow it's not just it's not just in your mind. Your body holds that trauma somehow. And so it's yeah. I work with a friend of mine who does yoga for that reason, to release some of the trauma, and it's proved really effective.
Yes, and my cousin, who was a Vietnam vet, struggled with PTSD for the longest time, and of course he still does on some level. But he started taking yoga, and they had a yoga class for Vietnam vets down where he lives in Lincoln, Nebraska, and it was extremely healing and helping him to deal with the PTSD.
I have a question for both of you from our friend Vanessa. Who are writers and storytellers that inspire you in your own work, and or whose work you would recommend any day of the week? That's for both of you.
Oh boy. You know,
Where do you start?
yeah, that's a big one. I've been reading a lot of Italo Calvino lately, who wrote Invisible Cities, and one of my favorite books that it's 6 essays for the coming millennium that he wrote in 1985. That so it was what was gonna happen in the year 2000 that then 9/11 threw out of whack. And so, but to hear what he thought it, and he works in paradox. It's one of the most beautiful books. So I've been reading Calvino lately, and that's a book I return to over and over and over.
I've been reading Ocean Vuong,
Oh, yeah, yay!
and oh my God, I love that. I love
Oh,
that kid. I love his work so much. And also, I'm working on a novel now that's based on, well, it's based on my marriage, which was not very fun. And so I've been reading books by, well, I read, is anyone familiar with Memorial Drive by Natasha Truthaway? She's primarily a poet, but she wrote this memoir about her stepfather having killed her mother. And I mean, just to read prose written by a poet is just absolutely amazing. And also, you know, I'm just trying to hook into books that are sort of, you know, talking about things that I'm trying to write about. Yeah, and that I'm trying to fictionalize, put it like that. Yeah, so those are that's where I am in terms of reading right now.
Thank you. Yeah, scribbling madly because I want to read those. Carolyn, we have another question for you. How did you come up with the title of your book?
Lucille Clifton has a poem, isn't, oh man, Lucille Clifton, she's such a wonderful poet. And one of her poems is called At the Cemetery, Walnut Grove Plantation, South Carolina, 1989. And I'm just going to read a short part of it, which is an epigraph for my book. Nobody mentions slaves, and yet the curious tools shine with your fingerprints. Nobody mentions slaves, but somebody did this work, who had no guide, no stone, who molders under rock. Tell me your names. Tell me your bashful names, and I will testify. Well, my book begins with, you know, a prologue about where I come from and all that stuff. But the next one is about a visit that I had from an ancestor. I'm just sitting in my living room, you know, minding my own business, and I look up and I see this ghost standing there. And she says to me, "You have to tell our story." And then she was gone. And I thought, okay. And so I see my book as me testifying to my story, my family's story, and, you know, adding to what's being written about my people's story. But it comes from Lucille Clifton's poem and my ancestor telling me I have to testify.
I saw a raised hand, but I can't. Kate, you have a question.
Yes. Carolyn, are you going to write another book about your ancestors? When I read that book, I wanted to know much, much more about your ancestors.
Truth is, I don't know. As it comes in, like we were talking, I mean, oh gosh, about the way that stories tell you, stories speak to you. So if they come back, I'm gonna listen. Probably because that's kind of where I live, in this weird space. So probably so, but I wouldn't swear to it. Sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
No, I was listening.
Anyone else, either in the chat or on my screen? Question for Kevin or Carolyn? Thank you both so much. I have been, this is just, selfishly, I'm thrilled with this. So.
Well, I'm thrilled that you invited me to
Me
read
too.
with Kevin Kling. I'm just so amazed.
Oh, likewise, Carolyn. This is so great. God, I love your work.
Thank you. I love yours too.
Thank you all for joining us. It's always such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
And Mary Jo, I love your work
Yeah.
too.
Hi,
And
Hey,
you.
Kevin. Hello, I'm right here. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, so, all right. Well, good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
If
Night.
anyone wants
you.
to share this, we'll have the link to it on our website starting tomorrow. So thank you both for coming so much. It's fantastic.
Thanks, Abby.
Thanks, Abby.
Thanks, Abby.